Well, welcome everyone. This is Industry Cast, where we go live to have a discussion with experts out in the industry regarding topics that are ideally relevant for the manufacturing community that we serve. Today, we are very fortunate to have Dave Kralovetz with us. He is with Cincinnati Test Systems. As you can see there, he's the global medical market specialist and lives over in the greater Minneapolis area, not in Minnesota. He always points out that he's in Wisconsin. But we are fortunate to have Dave, and I have worked together for many, many years. He is a subject matter expert before coming with, how many years you been with CTS now, Dave?
It has been almost 13.
13 years. So prior to that, he was with a competitor and my point is he's got a tremendous amount of leak test experience. He is a wealth of knowledge, and we are very fortunate and excited to have him here today to discuss some tips and tricks and things to know about testing disposable medical devices, which obviously is a big industry and a lot of new technology being evolved and developed in that space. So Dave, take us away, my man.
Thank you, Russ, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend. Just a caveat to add on to what Russ said. Yes, I have to make sure that I let people know that I'm not actually living in Minnesota, because as a Packer fan, we're not allowed to live in Minnesota. And if we do, we lose our credentials, and there's no chance of season tickets. And for those of you that don't know, to get in the lower bowl, it's like about a 20-year wait to get tickets. So I've got my fingers crossed, and I'm making sure I don't cross that border, at least in terms of my residency. So with that, awesome. Thank you again for attending, and let's go through some tips and tricks on developing a testing scope and process for a medical device, disposable medical device. I'll start with a very quick intro on CTS. CTS is part of the TASI group, and TASI now is comprised of 18 independent companies in various specialties. The one that CTS is involved with primarily is the Product Integrity Group, and we're the largest member of that group. TASI as a whole is a very well-funded company, annual sales of about $500 million, and about 1,500 employees worldwide.
Wow.
The Product Integrity Group that we are part of is of roughly 1/3 of the size of TASI, so about 550 employees and about 150 million in annual sales. CTS is responsible for roughly half of that business volume annually. So we are a significant member of the TASI family. CTS as a company was founded back in 1981, back in the suburbs, I'll call it, of Cincinnati, Ohio, and where we remain today. And our new headquarters is in the city of Harrison. We have direct offices and partnered relationships with various distributors and agents worldwide. And you'll see from the slide that we have presence across the globe. We are North America's largest leak test manufacturer that can supply full turnkey systems. So we offer not only, and I'll get into this in a little bit, not only the test instrumentation alone and accessories, but also complete turnkey solutions for your needs. In terms of technologies, the technologies in terms of typical leak or testing of devices is primarily based around pressure and vacuum decay. That's the most common by far. We also offer mass flow testing, which in limited cases can be used for leak testing, but in most cases in disposable medical device is typically limited to blockage testing most often, restriction or blockage testing. Then finally, for non-disposables, for typically durables that are implanted, we offer tracer gas technology, which is the ultimate in leak testing. But of course, the consumable trace gas, helium or forming gas, the cost of this and the cost of that equipment oftentimes makes it cost prohibitive, process cycle time prohibitive to do with single-use disposable devices that are typically made of plastic.
Right.
And then, of course, the instrument line that we carry is very wide. And the key thing that I want to highlight here is that the instruments that are on the upper left-hand corner here, the Black Belt Pro, and MH are by far our most common instruments sold to the disposable medical device industry. We offer accessories like NIST traceable leak and flow standards. We are one of the only companies in existence making leak testers that have an ISO 17025 certified lab, and we do that not only for our leak and flow standards, but we also calibrate our instruments to those same ISO standards, and we're accredited for that. In addition to that, we also offer a complement of mating components that allow mating of your part to the test instrument. So a variety of connectors and seals that seal radially, either on the inside diameter or on the outside diameter of a port or fitting. We make specialty connectors for lure fittings. We do some very simple, basic benchtop type fixtures, and we do cut and molded seals as accessories. And then we do full turnkey systems. Anything from a simple system like you'll see in the upper left-hand, the photo in the upper left-hand corner, that's a simple benchtop tester mated to, or a simple benchtop fixture mated to one of our black belt testers, all the way through to complete functional test systems that sell for over $5 million. What sets us apart is our testing lab, and our testing lab does no charge feasibility testing for your parts. For example, you may have an application that you're not sure if it can even be leak tested or flow tested, and you would like us to take a look at that and give you our analysis. We can do that for you at no charge. We'll actually do testing on the parts. If you have gauge R&R specifications, if you have leak rate specifications or any other criteria, cycle time requirements, many of those elements and unknowns we can prove out for you in our lab that is loaded with equipment and engineers who specifically do that function for us. Then also, as a complement to that, we do paid testing for very discrete or unique requirements. Perhaps you need us to do some process optimization for you. Perhaps you need us to do extensive gauge repeatability studies. Things like that we can do beyond just basic feasibility because we have the bandwidth available to do that. Our service department is also unique. It is completely divorced from our manufacturing group, and there are 7 full-time service technicians who travel and can perform both field and in-house support and services, including part sales, including in-house retrofits and repairs, and field service analysis, calibrations, and so forth. So with that, let's talk about your parts. You've developed a new medical device. What could possibly go wrong? Well, leaks. Are there joints that may cause, that may be perforated or may allow ingress or egress due to improper assembly? First thing that you'd ask yourself, and this is a bit of this is you'd know this as PFMEA or FMEA or FMA. But the first thing we look at is what media are you involving in this medical device in clinical use? Is it something thick, heavy, like paste, tissue? Is it a liquid of some viscosity solution, such as IV or saline? Is it blood? Is it a drug? Is it gas? Are you looking to contain or keep out air, vacuum, oxygen, nitrogen, and so forth? What happens if that media gets out? Is there a biohazard risk due to perhaps blood? Is there a radioactive contrast media that may leak out into the operating room or into the procedure area? What happens if air or other gases or other media gets in? Is there a risk of an embolism, a bubble basically in the liquid path? Is there a risk of biocontamination of a sample or something like that? What areas of the part might have leaks that would be involved due to an assembly area? Are there solvent or UV adhesive joints or connections that may have had incorrect amounts of solvent and as a result of improper assembly have leaks? How about weld joints, such as ultrasonic welding or spin welding or any other form, infrared or other?
Hey, Dave,
Sure.
looking at the balloon style catheter type. Maybe that's not exactly what that is, but it looks like a version of that.
Yes,
You know,
sure.
that is a common, very common medical application. I know it presents a myriad of challenges for those type of it. And the industry primarily dunks them underwater. Has there been any technology that has proven to be reliable in testing those type of devices?
Excellent question. The funny thing is that we seldom see such a wide variation of feasibility as we do with the term balloon catheter. So for example, if we're talking about a cardiovascular catheter that potentially has a stent applied to it, or maybe it's used for dilation of a blood vessel where it's being expanded. Now, we love those because the balloon is very rigid. If it's deflated and you felt it in your fingers, it's actually kind of crunchy. It's definitely the balloon material is a very rigid material because it's designed to only expand to a certain diameter, even when pressurized at extremely high liquid or hydrostatic pressures. Those are a piece of cake to test. We don't even have to do anything special. They're nice, low volume, very easy to pick up leaks. Now
Yeah.
let's look at the other end of the scale. The stretchy balloon catheters, maybe like a Foley catheter that's used in the bladder to retain position. Any position retention or occlusion type balloons that have highly elastic characteristics such as latex, which isn't seen that often anymore, silicone, or perhaps urethane. Those catheters are a nightmare. Why? Well, we pressurize them with air and they'll grow, but they don't just stop growing when we stop pressurizing. They will continue to stretch and move. And an ever-changing volume is a nightmare to try to do a fine leak test.
Right.
For example, there are trach balloons that are used when a patient is unconscious and intubated. The air pathway has this trach tube placed in, and then the balloon is inflated to hold its position. Well, okay, the balloon now is not carrying a liquid like it would be if it were a Foley catheter. So the media, being a gas, leaks faster. The other thing that happens is the trach tube could be indwelling in the patient for up to 3 weeks. And what happens if the trach tube begins to leak and the balloon starts shrinking? Potentially, the patient could drown in their own saliva for a period of time. So those applications are a tragedy to try to test with anything but a tracer gas. So those are some of the extreme situations where tracer gas would actually be required. How many are actually using tracer gas? I honestly can't think of any. This has been a proven successful application. However, the customer is making these trach tubes because they're used so often. Look at the cost of the consumption of the tracer gas media and the cost of the equipment, which typically the price tag starts at around 150,000 US dollars for a turnkey system that is tracer gas capable of measuring a trach tube balloon. And this oftentimes exceeds the budgets and would put a real twist in the manufacturing process for many of the manufacturers of such devices. And so to answer that question on those types of catheters, most customers are still dunking them, unfortunately. There's just not a better way to do that at the moment.
Yeah, I'll never forget going to a customer that makes those latex catheters, and them they've got rows of people pressurizing. They use a syringe to pressurize it and then put it underwater and look for bubbles, and then if it doesn't, they hang it up, let it dry, and send it on down the way. I mean, massive bundles of these things. It's such a labor intensive process, but just like you said, the technology to be as consistent, even as the employee that's looking at it, has been a challenge. So Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
That's often
Totally.
that's a common medical one. I've seen it. I know you've seen it.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. We get asked about that at least typically a couple of times a week. We're queried on that, that customers are hoping for a better solution than what we offer today. The other potential risk is that you might have blockages. Again, many of these parts are assembled with a solvent or an adhesive. Well, there's always the risk that there is excessive solvent or adhesive, and in the process of assembly, might you have blocked off a pathway that's supposed to exist for patency from end to end on the device? So the first thing we ask is there a certain pathway that there is a high risk or some risk of blockage that would prohibit the target media from being inserted in or passed through your device? The first question is, does that pathway pass all the way through? So for example, if we're talking about an IV tubing set that's designed to go from an IV bag to the patient, well, of course, this is a tubing set that has an inlet and an outlet clearly, and is designed to simply transfer that media. The same thing with a blood transfer tubing set. Very straightforward. There are others, such as balloon catheters and others, where the pathway is going to terminate at a final destination within the device. Are there risks that there are blockages, and what would happen if they were blocked? So determining this will guide us to a testing need or a testing requirement, and we can look at that if you identify that up front.
Yeah. So what you're
Sure.
explaining here, what you're going over is you're helping our customers identify some of the questions or answer the questions that need to be answered in order to determine the appropriate technology to be applied for your application. That's what we're working
That
through
is,
here.
yes, that is exactly right. And these are very common back and forth questions that we will have with our customer base when
Mhm.
they contact us and say, yeah, we're looking to do this. We'll ask these questions of you just to find out, have you thought about this? Is there a risk? Because we'd rather help you identify some of those things early. And even if you decide that that's not a risk, or it's something that at least you have mentally crossed that, gone down that path to investigate it before you're going to move forward with purchasing something.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the big questions too that I don't want to understate this is a big one. What happens if the pathway is only partly blocked? Does that matter? Good question. We'll come up to in the next slide. Are there any other functional elements that the part has that you need to challenge or test, or is there anything else that could go wrong, I should say? Such as, is there a check valve, a one-way valve, somewhere in line with this device that there's a risk that during assembly, that valve could be compromised? Maybe it's a one-way valve, maybe it's a pressure relief valve. And is there a potential that that the part that we're under, that you're looking at analyzing, is supposed to somehow generate its own pressure vacuum? For example, there's suction therapy devices, disposable devices that are used for wound therapy. Some of these devices have built-in suction generating elements, such as a bag that has an expanding plastic element inside of it that actually creates a negative pressure vacuum. Do you need to check that? Do you need to verify that that was assembled properly and that it's pulling the right amount of vacuum for normal clinical use? And finally, do you need to test seal strength? Now, this most of the time happens in the forms of bag testing, where it's typically a radio frequency heat sealed bag made of 2 layers of material, and you need to perhaps challenge this to make sure that the seal strength is what you were expecting. All
Yeah.
these questions,
So
those come in.
do you see those mostly being tested prior to fill or post fill using some type of vacuum decay technology? What's the most common method out?
Excellent question. So our case, we typically specialize in the pre-filling process. So we will see this happen one of two ways. we will see that either the customer is testing, and I'll address this in the next slide also, is are they testing them 100%? Or are they testing only audit or a sample batch? Well, depending upon that, that'll oftentimes lead to different requirements that the customer may have. But in any case, when we're normally testing before the device is being filled with some media, we have sister companies who actually specialize in post-filling operations testing that do an excellent job and specialize in filled container testing. But for us, it's primarily going to be for things like IV bags and blood bags. We're testing them before they're being filled.
Got it.
Now, if I can identify what could go wrong, how should I challenge those? How could I challenge, or how should I challenge those possible failures? Well, for leak testing, the first thing that we want to know from you is what test pressure would you like to subject the part to during test? Is it, if you can identify what the typical pressure would be in clinical use, that's a great starting point. It may not be the end answer, but at least it's a great starting point if you haven't identified that. And that is by far the most common. Some parts, some applications could see spikes or surges during clinical use. And if that happens, do you need to challenge the part at that elevated pressure? Or instead, do you simply want to prove that it can be subjected to that pressure for some minimum time period? We call that a proof test. Do you want to just simply subject it to it for some amount of time to make sure it survives it, and then step down and actually do the leak test immediately after that at a lower nominal operating pressure? It's a very common test that we run into with some devices that could see pressure spikes during clinical use. Contrast solution components are a very common application for this, where a syringe injecting contrast solution at high pressures is used. Those applications can see some definite spikes during operation. Reject criteria. Is there a spec already in place? If you're a medical device manufacturer, unless you're working for a larger institution, meaning one of the larger companies who's been established and typically in operation for maybe a few decades, unless you're in a situation like this, it is highly unlikely that you will have a spec in place, such as a leak rate at a given pressure. That is extremely uncommon, unfortunately, in the medical device industry. If, on the other hand, if you don't know if you don't have a spec, an existing spec, do you want to go through, or are you willing to go through the empirical study to determine what actually could cause a field failure, and then break down and analyze that, determine what flow or leak rates that cause the actual clinical issue, and then maybe set your reject criteria as some fraction of that? Or are you like most, for better or worse, where you, instead of going through empirical study to determine exactly what will cause clinical failure and reject a fraction of that, instead, you choose to simply use pressure change to identify what is a typical or normal part that you've based your analysis on, that is based upon testing a multitude of parts that are known as non-leakers, and then creating a pressure change band of typical good and rejecting anything that falls outside of that, which may or may not actually be a real world failure. This, for better or for worse, is the most common we run into in the medical device industry. Most customers, do not have an existing spec, or are not that lucky. Those who do are very lucky and very fortunate. It makes your job a lot easier.
Yeah,
For
no,
those that aren't,
it's
go ahead, Russ.
a lot of those specs that I see, and you probably come across this as well in the medical world, are pressure loss specifications.
Precisely.
Is that common what you're seeing?
Precisely. And what that comes
As
from,
opposed to a flow rate, which is
right,
in the automotive industry, which is much more mature as it relates to establishing reject criteria for leak applications. they always use a flow. Typically, well, most
That's
commonly,
exactly right.
95% of the time, they use a flow rate.
And for the automotive industry, it makes perfect sense for one reason. Imagine you're a vehicle manufacturer and you've got engine components. Well, this year we have these engines that we have. Next year, we're going to add two more and drop two. The following year, we're going to add another one and drop one, and so on. As their systems or as their vehicle launches evolve and their engine components change, ever changing and evolving constantly, they have chosen long ago to do bullet point number 2, determine what causes a failure and select the reject criteria upon that. Then they have criteria that they can apply not only to the 5-liter engine, but to the 2.3-liter engine, as well as the 6.4-liter engine, as well as the 3.8-liter, and so on. They can apply the same specs across a wide range. Well, why is there a need to do that? Well, because a leak rate can be independent of the volume under test. This is not the same case with pressure loss. With pressure loss, if I have two items that are similar in construction, one is the size of a golf ball, the other the size of a hot water heater tank in your home, but they have the same shell or geometry or construction. If I drill a laser drilled hole through the golf ball sized item that is 25 micron, and I drill a same 25 micron hole through the large tank, if I were to test those at the same pressure, I would see during a pressure decay leak test, I would see a massive pressure loss in the same amount of time on the golf ball sized item because there's not much area or gas in there when it's filled to begin with. And I would see almost no decay on the large tank because there is so much air, there are so many air molecules and air mass inside of that I need to lose a significant amount of air before I see the pressure start to dip. Volume is supremely important with pressure decay testing. Well, converting that to a leak rate allows you to level the playing field and identify what loss rate, not based upon purely what's inside the part, but how much loss of air equals a field failure. And if, or at least a part that we want to identify as compromised or a reject, it is much easier to apply that across a large range of different volumes in what may be an entire product family that's under similar use. Much easier to do that than trying to do independent testing with a pressure loss specification, where if you really want to find out what's leaking the same or reject what's leaking the same actual amount, you would have to do trials and experiments on each independent volume separately and come up with a new pressure change or pressure decay window of acceptability and reject. It's a lot more work in the long run.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. So depending, if you've got a single-use medical device, if your volumes are limited and you're always going to have it mated to a single benchtop test instrument, you're not breaking any laws by setting up a delta P spec, doing it following bullet point 3, which is identifying your typical good part, setting X number of standard deviations above and below nominal decay values, and setting that as your, we'll call it your typical or your normal good band, and rejecting anything outside of that. Where it would behoove you to perhaps look at converting to a leak rate is if you're doing tubing sets and you have 200 different SKU numbers and the volumes of these different parts under test are varying by 10, 20% across their range. It will be far easier for you to level the playing field to come up with a reject specification in flow and then teach the tester what that flow looks like on that particular part volume. Life will become a lot easier for you. So that's the lesson of the day in terms of leak rate versus delta P. That said, what is the market doing? 95% are rejecting based on delta P. Each new product is given a new spec and a new range. Those who have large families have learned to go the other way, but many device manufacturers have a more limited scope and a limited amount of products that are FDA approved. And as a result, they tend to do the delta P route. So we're not saying one is wrong or the other, or that we will or won't work with you one way or the other.
Certainly.
A
Yes.
huge number of our customers do delta P, and we're fine with that as long as we coach you and advise you. Whatever you do, don't have 5 different parts of 5 different volumes and try to reject the exact same delta P pressure change value for all of them, because on the little ones, you're going to be acting very restrictively. On the large ones, you're going to be allowing a lot more liberal leak or loss, and you will not have a level playing field.
Absolutely.
So with that, then,
Okay.
so we can look at blockage then. Okay, so for a blockage test, pressures. Do we know what is that typical operating pressure? Very similar to what we looked at. Is it critical that we do the blockage test with the exact same pressure, or do we have some latitude? How about reject criteria? Do I have a spec already in place? Maybe perhaps a certain flow rate limitation, or maybe a pressure loss spec, something like that.
Or percentage, a common conversation is the percentage of blockage. That's
Exactly right. Do I have a spec in place already? And if not, okay, the first question we're going to ask you, and you should ask yourself, is, do I need to detect partial blockages? We would all love to be able to do that. And if there were no cost adder to it, I think everyone would be looking to do partial blockage. But unfortunately, it is a jump in the technology. Graded blockage testing, the best possible way to do this, and the only way that we will typically quote for your protection as customers, is to do this utilizing mass flow technology.
right.
So we are going to subject the part to a fixed amount of pressure, and we're going to look for variations in the amount of free flow through that device from inlet to outlet. And this is typically where we see partial blockage desired or needed. In most cases, this is going to be for a specific drug delivery rate. Maybe you have a bottleneck intentionally in your tubing set that connects from the drug pump or some ambulatory infusion pump to the patient. And you want to verify that maybe the right orifice or restrictor was put in, or you want to make sure that it will deliver at least some minimum delivery rate. We see this with oxygen tubing sets that are going into the nasal passages on a patient. We'll see this with anesthesia for certain, also going to a patient. We'll see this with any type of drug delivery. Very common, the customer will want to detect a partial restriction. Do I need to see if the part's restricted 30%, 50%, 80%, and make decisions of pass or fail based upon it? And then, of course, others. Are there any other specs that you've got? Is there any existing spec for the opening pressure of a one-way valve inside the device? Is there a test for any of the criteria that you have for the relief testing or pressure relief or vacuum relief testing on certain devices? Is any of that critical to you? What seal strength might we have as a requirement? Is there anything that's listed there? Now, once we've identified some of those areas that we need to challenge or test, how do we pick the right tools? Well, in general, the first question you need to ask yourself is, am I targeting or wanting to pursue an audit test, sampling test, or do I need to 100% test? That'll have a huge impact on the direction you take in terms of testing equipment, because one form, such as 100%, will take place typically in the clean room, and things like throughput rate are going to be hugely impacting, or will be hugely critical to what testing type, testing method, and procedure that we're going to be doing. On the other hand, audit or AQL, normally the sampling rates are low enough and slow enough that it's not critical that we have a certain throughput rate and a certain requirement, and often one up or single part testing will handle all those needs. How many different part models are we talking about? Do we have a family, or are we looking at just a single entity, a single SKU number or part number? Do we have this manufactured on a single manufacturing line, or is it going to be multiple? Is this going to be done maybe perhaps in single piece flow on a manual assembly line? Or instead, is this going to be automated? And will the load and unload be handled automatically, such as utilizing a robot or a pallet transfer system or something like that? What fits your manufacturing environment better? Is it a tabletop or a benchtop type instrument that'll be manually loaded and unloaded? Or instead, if this is going to be added to or augmenting an automated assembly system, is an upright or a wall mount a better choice? And then what are my throughput needs? Not just for today when I finally get FDA approval, but what about long term? Do I envision a high ramp rate of output over the years, where today my initial volumes are going to be very low, and in a couple of years we're expecting to build 6 times higher production?
Yeah, and that's going to determine that's going to determine the cycle time. So do you need it in 10 seconds? Do you need it in 4 seconds? Do you need it in 20 seconds, a minute? So that's the throughput needs critical to identifying the quantity as well as applying the appropriate instrumentation, which you're going to talk about now, I think.
No, absolutely. And here's the other element too to that is, perhaps if I'm doing a manual assembly line, and I'm doing, regardless of what my volumes may be 3 years from now, I know that the current line with single piece flow and manual assembly, the throughput rate's going to be X. If my production volumes increase, I'm not going to load that existing production line with 3 times the number of people. I'm going to have to create new lines that are separate from this original line, and I'm simply going to add them. Well, that makes your equipment selection or your choice a lot different than if you are having a piece of automated equipment built that's designed and capable of running 6 times the initial volume. But initially, it's just going to be set up to run fewer hours. Things like that are what Liz Russ said. That'll bear in mind in terms of cycle time and how many parts we must test each testing cycle. So now when it comes to picking what instrument, let's look at our requirements. Is the testing limited to pressure or vacuum-based testing alone? Or on the other hand, am I trying to do some grading where mass flow may be needed? Do I need to do any type of gradual increase in pressure or vacuum to challenge something else in the part? Perhaps a check valve or a pressure relief valve. Perhaps I need to do a proof test where I want to subject the part to a higher pressure for some short duration, simply to prove that it could survive a spike or a pressure surge.
Yeah,
and still
that integrity test, very common with, especially when it's a destructive test, but you do a ramp to event. So you're talking about when that check valve cracks open, or if you're doing some destructive testing and development of the product, where you ramp to event where it essentially comes apart. That's another tool that you can use and that instrumentation can have, right?
Precisely. And as long as we know that up front, we can incorporate those features in. The typical instruments that are on the market from us and from any of our competitors are typically going to be, the initial offering is a pressure-based system alone. And we add to that the capabilities of mass flow. We add to that the capabilities of ramping if desired, and so forth. So we can equip that instrument or those systems based upon your needs. But the more you can identify up front, the fewer retrofits you're going to have to subject yourself to, the sooner you're going to receive exactly what you need and have it available for your use in-house.
Yeah, and certainly, and that's what we do, right? So I just want to encourage everyone that sees this that's why they pay us, is to help customers identify and answer all of these questions.
That's it. And we hope to act as your counselor, your guide, or your consultant on this, because we see this every single day in multitude. So we can help speed that process for you. In some cases, like the example we talked about, which is wound therapy, where suction is created based upon a device in normal use. Do you need to do a test of that? Does the system that we provide you need to be capable of basically acting like a pressure gauge, where we're not supplying any pressure or vacuum? We are connecting our transducer via the test port on the instrument, mating it to your part, and we're letting your part create negative pressure or positive pressure. You want to verify what your device is capable of producing and have that as a check. We do stuff like this all the time.
Yeah.
Do you need to verify that there is a specific internal volume somehow? This can happen with some forms of blockage where there might be a blind blocked point where you need to verify, hey, if I pressurize this and I leak test it, is the pressure that I'm subjecting it to getting all the way to the end of the part, or to the balloon maybe of where I'm trying to direct the air? Or is it only getting part way there and really I'm not testing the entire device, but it's blocked off? We can do volume verification tests to verify and prove that air or vacuum is getting all the way to that end destination that you want. So if we know that up front.
Another way to explain this, and this is a common question that I get from customers when they are thinking about, gosh, how do you verify the volume? Well, we take a known volume that we pressurize to a specific pressure, and then we expose the test part to that known volume, not adding any additional air, and the two balance out. And so we know with the end pressure what amount of air went from our known volume into our test part, and that pressure that's left we can then use it to determine the volume of the part. So just to explain how we do a volumetric fill type of test and verification, that is one of the common ways that we do it.
Well said. I mean, that's exactly right. And the best part about that type of volume test that Russ just explained is that this works two ways. This can be used two ways. It can be used to verify that we don't have or that we are actually subjecting the entire interior of the part that we're designed to test. We're exposing the entire interior. And if not, we will see after that volumetric dump or delivery, we will see a higher than expected pressure, indicating, wait a minute, pressure did not make it all the way through the part. We're not pressurizing the full part, we're only pressurizing part of it. So we can reject based upon detecting that if we're trying to make sure that the entire interior is exposed to the pressure that we're subjecting. Now let's flip that. Maybe we're testing a part that's sealed. The only way to test a part that's sealed is you have to put that into a chamber, typically vacuum chamber. We'll do a volumetric verification to make sure that we don't have a gross leak. Imagine taking maybe a foil sealed pouch or a sachet that you may be using in the packaging area of your company for some devices. Imagine putting that into a vacuum chamber. Now, normally we're going to simply apply vacuum and try to suck the air headspace out of that foil sealed pack. And that's very straightforward. No rocket science there. Easy. However, what if that foil pouch has a big tear in it?
Gross leak.
If I simply put vacuum in that chamber, I could suck all of the air that was in that pouch. I could suck all of it out while I'm simply applying vacuum. Now there's no air left. I'm going to pass that part because it's going to look like a champ in terms of a lack of pressure decay. But in reality, it is a gross leak. We use that volume verification. And if we dump that volume into that vacuum chamber and we see that there's too much volume, we know your part has been grossly compromised, it's a gross leak, and we can fail that too with the same configuration on the instrument. This is very versatile. Okay, so is your need today known and fixed? Very straightforward. Or do you think that there's a chance something could change as you're in development of this device? Do you need some flexibility that actually will guide the direction of which instrument we choose for you? Because some are more flexible than others. What accuracy do you need? What type of precision do you need on the measurement of decay? You have gauge repeatability requirements. How repeatable does the process need to be? Is that defined? Do you need to just test one part? Or as we talked about with the audit versus 100% or your throughput, do we need to test multiple parts at the same time? If we do test multiple parts, can we set those up and have maybe 4 of them connected to an instrument, hit start, and they progressively test one after another, one at a time, but without operator involvement other than load and unload? Or on the other hand, is our throughput requirements high enough that we need to test all 4 together concurrently at the exact same time? And then if we are testing those concurrently, am I okay with unloading 4 parts or 3 parts, reloading 3 or 4 parts and hitting start? Or do I really want to be able to do kind of what we call a round robin start, where I unload and reload part 1 and start part 1 by itself, then unload and reload 2, and this way keeping the operator actively involved and moving? Doing that, that's called asynchronous testing, and our testers allow this. Our multi-channel testers allow this. It's a huge benefit because it can actually save you 30% or more total throughput. It can improve your throughput process because the tester is the operator is always working and nothing is waiting on anything else. So these are all things to think about. And then for communications, do I need to communicate those test results anywhere? Is it going to stay in the instrument, or do I need to send them to the network? When it comes to other elements, such as in this case, how am I going to mate the instrument to the part? Am I going to use manual connections and maybe some lure fittings, or maybe push on some tubing onto a spike? Or do I really prefer to have something that's automated, semi-automated in terms of a connector that might be pneumatically actuated to mate up and seal, where each engagement tends to be more consistent and there's no issues with a large operator twisting a lure fitting onto a connector versus a pneumatic seal that's always acting the same, where it doesn't matter if the operator's got nice strong hands or weak hands? Do I need to do any error proofing? Do I need to lock up the part on a failure? Do I need to cut the part perhaps if it's a failure and intentionally damage it so that it can't get through? Do I have turnkey needs? Do I really want someone to put together a complete fixture for me? Or is this simply connect one end to the tester and hit start? What are those requirements for gauge repeatability on a gauge R&R? When it comes to this is the last slide, selecting the right supplier, just things to ask yourself. Do they have a feasibility lab? Can they test parts for me? Or am I going to be solely responsible for determining if this can even be tested? Do I have to buy the instrument from them and then prove it out on my own? Does the instrument that I'm looking at the supplier providing, does it have the precision and the accuracy capability that I need or want? That's a question you want to ask yourself early in the process. We have had many customers come to us because they've selected something that is incapable of achieving their final true accuracy specs. And at that point, they're starting over again working with us versus buying the right thing the first time. And can they certify those pressure, precision, and accuracy elements on their calibration documents? Is the supplier capable of providing ISO 17025 accreditation, not only for leak and flow standards, but for the pressure and the flow calibrations that they do at the factory or even potentially in the field? Does the supplier offer just test instruments, or can they offer me some of the mating connections, accessories? If I begin and my volumes are low and I buy the instrument only, do I have the capability of going back to that manufacturer and saying, hey, can you guys build me a turnkey solution utilizing this instrument or a duplicate of this instrument if I need that higher throughput or I need that, that improved automation later on? Does it appear as though the supplier's product portfolio covers the needs not only of this specific application, but potentially if I have new applications that have other requirements, is their product portfolio wide enough where I can simply utilize one supplier, validate based upon that supplier's menus, their documentation, their certifications, and so forth? Is it going to be easier for me to do new projects through them than it would be from a supplier that may have a much more limited offering and can handle what I need to do at this moment? But once I develop the new product, they will not be able to offer me the same equipment, and I'm going to have to start over again with a new supplier. Do I need local support alone at just one location? Or is this potentially going to involve several facilities, maybe across the globe? And is that supplier in a position to support globally or multiple locations? Here's a key one. Is the supplier available technically, at least by phone or web, when my production is running? Or am I going to have to contact them if I have a problem after hours, after their normal operating hours? Am I going to have to contact them when they open the following day in many cases, when I'm experiencing a down situation or I need technical help? If I need a field service technician, do they have people available to travel? Believe it or not, this is not very common in this industry. Typically,
I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about a situation, and they said, "Well, just send it back." I said, "Well, the customer can't send it back." He said, "Well, we don't go out and we don't make service calls, so we only service our products in house." I was dumbfounded. I'm like, really?
Exactly.
How does a supplier in today's world get away with not having field service support? But they did.
And I don't want to make this a commercial about CTS, because I'll tell you, we're a large organization, as I stated earlier. There's a lot of advantages to being a smaller operation. Believe me, I wish in many ways that we were more flexible, more nimble, and so forth. But I will tell you, our larger company size and our ability to separate our service team as its own business unit and not have them tied to our manufacturing group, where they are told, oh, well, we really can't send this guy out because he's assembling product that has to ship by month end. We don't deal with this at all. And that's not true of everybody out there. It's a huge advantage having a company that has a wide enough bandwidth and a large enough global footprint to be able to take care of those really dire customer needs when they have it, versus being a small entity that really is limited in terms of staff, in terms of technical personnel, that really can't afford to have that person leave the building. It's a difference. It's a differentiator.
Certainly.
What about warranty? Do they have warranty to cover where I'm shipping the equipment? Do they warranty outside the US if I intend on sending this to Mexico? If I intend on sending this to China? Is the warranty still valid, or is it only a USA warranty or something like that? Do they charge for non-warranty phone support? If I've purchased this through an integrator, am I going to get the runaround because I wasn't the direct purchaser and I don't have my company's name listed as the end purchaser? Are there going to be issues there? And in the next economic downturn, is that supplier going to be around?
Right.
So with that, I thank you. Please contact Russ's team and CTS if you have any questions, if we can help. We are more than happy to do so. That's what they pay us to do. So bring us your devices and we'll bring you solutions. And as I told Russ earlier, ask us no questions. We'll tell you no lies. Thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Really appreciate your time and appreciate the customers that are here, and those that watch this. Please don't hesitate to engage us. We are here to support you. We exist because of you. And as I always say, we are just so grateful that we have the opportunity to serve you here at CapEx. So until next time, have an awesome day. Dave, thanks so much. Appreciate you, and catch you on the flip side.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.